Well, good afternoon. I hope you're all enjoying your lunch. And from the reactions to the morning speakers, I think you've all been enjoying the session. So we hope to continue in like fashion this afternoon. Let me make a couple of announcements here. First of all, for those of you who are teachers and signed up for the continuing education credit, the certificates will be available from Charles Nugent. Charles, raise your hand where you are. You can visit him sometime this afternoon and get your certificate. The other thing I wish to point up is the fact that, again, through the second, I guess midway through the second afternoon session, for those of you on the live stream, or if you're here in-house and you'd like to join the Texas State Historical Association, or you would like to donate to the association, we can always use the cash, and we can always use your membership. Our members are what make the organization. And so please sign up, and you will have or donate, and you will have a chance to win the, those of you who are here have seen it in the lobby on your way in, very handsomely framed map. And, but those of you on the live stream are available to win it as well. That drawing will take place at the end of the day. Right now, I would like to continue with a special program here during our lunch break, and that is if you opened your program, I hope all of you opened your program, you saw that there was a sheet on Jan DeVault. And Jan was a mover and shaker and sometimes a driver. She actually drove me around once. So she did whatever it took to make this event successful. And we lost her last year, and here to discuss Jan's life and her work with the Conservancy, I would like to introduce the present president of the San Jacinto Consortium, Cecil Jones. Cecil?
Thank you, Frank. Actually, I go by Cecil, but normally it's the Europeans that call me Cecil. But either way is fine. Well, good afternoon. I am the current president. I've served different roles in the organization for several years as a vice president. One of the things I have not done is I've never been involved in the organization of this symposium, although I do attend it every year. So we have several members on our board who have been involved extensively from day one to make this happen, and we're very thankful to be able to work with the TSHA going forward. So thank you to everyone for your help. As you know, Jan DeVault was one of the founders, along with Jeff Dunn, of the organization. And she was our longtime president. And as Frank said, Jan did whatever was necessary to move our organization toward our goals. So she is sorely missed. Many of us that are trying to step in and keep the organization going are sometimes scratch our heads and say, how did Jan do that? Or, you know, those sorts of things. But we're doing our best. Another thing I wanted to mention is there are several members of the DeVault family sitting here. Madeline, Jan's granddaughter, is actually on our board, so we appreciate her for several reasons. One is she's a lot younger than most of us, and two, she kind of keeps us on the path that she thinks Jan would want us to go in order that our goals are the same as what they were before. So there are a lot of people who could say things about Jan today, and we don't have the time, but we do have a little bit of time set aside. So again, I'd like to thank you for being here, and I'll turn it back over to Frank.
Well, I'm leading it off because the Texas State Historical Association at its annual meeting at the beginning of March normally pays tribute to Texans who've made a significant contribution to the historical aspect of life in Texas, whether it's preservation or it's history writing or whether it's the dissemination of knowledge. And so what I would like to do is read the resolution that was adopted at the annual meeting this year on Jan. It says, Janet Ann Miller DeVault, a member of the association. Whereas Janet Ann Miller DeVault departed this life May 6, 2017 in Houston, Texas, was a member of the Texas State Historical Association. And whereas Janet was born in Lubbock, Texas on San Jacinto Day, April 21, 1949, and after graduating from high school in Midland, Texas, graduated with a history degree at the University of Texas in Austin and worked the oil business. And whereas Janet used her interest in history to study her family's genealogy, and whereas Janet was a member of the Order of the Crown of Charlemagne in the USAS, the Order of the Merovingian Dynasty, and the Baronical Order of Magna Carta, and whereas Janet was also a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution and the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, where she also served as president of the San Jacinto chapter and served on the board of managers at the Alamo, and whereas Janet was appointed by Texas Governor George W. Bush to the San Jacinto Historical Advisory Board, was one of the co-founders and president of the San Jacinto Battleground Conservancy, helped found the San Jacinto Symposium, and published these efforts in The Ladies and the Battlefield, a partial chronology of the efforts of the San Jacinto chapter, Daughters of the Republic of Texas, to save and preserve the San Jacinto Battlefield, 1891 to 1999. Be it therefore resolved that the membership of the Texas State Historical Association laments the passing of this good and faithful servant on May 6, 2017, and extends sympathy to her family and friends, and be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be spread upon the minutes of the annual meeting, and another presented as is appropriate to the family of Janet Ann Miller DeVault, that they may know of the love and esteem in which she is held yet by all. Approved this 9th day of March 2018. Paula Mitchell Marks, President, and Jesus Frank de la Teja, Chief Executive Officer. And a copy of this resolution will be forwarded to the family in the coming days. Again, I wish to extend the sympathy of the whole association and my personal one, having known Jan in a limited capacity, that is 2 days a year, over the last few years, I really came to appreciate her. And now, somebody who would like to say a few words about her and the efforts of these, her efforts on behalf of the symposium. We're going to call Jim Crisp.
Thank you, Frank. When I opened my program today and this fell out into my lap, it affected me a great deal because it reminded me of how much we all miss Jan and how shocking her death was to us. I'm going to try not to personalize this, but I can't help it. Jan and Jeff Dunn prevailed upon me to be a speaker against my will at the first San Jacinto Symposium in 2001. I said, I don't have time to write anything. So they said, okay, don't write it, just wing it. And I'm afraid I did. But Jan was a consummate professional in everything she did. And the impact of the San Jacinto Symposium, and therefore of Jan, on my life, my personal life, in terms of friendships, and my professional life in terms of making contact with colleagues everywhere from UCLA to Mexico City to every place in Texas, was a very important part of my progress towards becoming Professor Emeritus of History, as I am now. I don't think I would have been there without Jan DeVault and the San Jacinto Symposium, for both technical reasons and obvious reasons. It helped my life as a scholar more than anyone else could know. And so I just wanted to say thank you to Jan, also to Jeff, but especially to Jan, because she pushed us gently towards where we needed to go. Thank you. And now let me introduce another person who has been working on the San Jacinto Symposia from the very beginning, who comes to us from Austin, Texas. Please welcome Elizabeth Widdler.
Jan gave so much to San Jacinto. It's not possible to fully pay tribute to her, even if each of us who knew her had the time to speak today. In the 18 years I worked with her, often daily, I saw her deep devotion to San Jacinto as expressed as a historian, an organizer, a fundraiser, an advocate, and more, pretty much whatever needed to be done. I'd like, before I go any further, to also introduce her family. Her family was paramount to her, and her two sons are here, and one each of their children. Chris, it's kind of hard to stand up and turn around, but Chris DeVault and his daughter is Madeline. And Brian and his son, Nicholas. Family was first, but yes, she did a lot of other things. I'd like to name 4 things to remember about Jan. First was the depth of her commitment. We like to think, and we say, that it was because she was born on San Jacinto Day, but it's really more than that. She didn't talk about it much because she didn't want to be a snob about it, but she was, and these people are, a member of the Houston family. Therefore, San Jacinto is pretty important. About the depth of her commitment. By the time I met her in 1999, she'd already written The Ladies and the Battleground, the first documented history of the place, beginning with the San Jacinto veterans, giving over its care to their daughters, literally their daughters, and hence the Daughters of the Republic of Texas came out of that. When Jan and I lamented about the loss of so much land in the Ship Channel area and the petrochemical complex that ate up so much more land, she said that once the refineries were gone, it would be about 100 years before the land was detoxified enough to grow the strawberries that had been growing there when the Ship Channel industries started. It was actually with the Shell refinery. That fact became a saying for her about how long we'd be dedicated to San Jacinto. We knew we wouldn't see the day, but the point was that we would look at each other and say, when things got really bad, until the strawberries grow again. She had a sampler about that hung in her office. Jan had an operating principle worth our all knowing and remembering. We spent 7 years trying to educate the Texas legislature and some state agencies about the fundamental importance of San Jacinto to the state, to the nation, and to the world. We wanted everybody involved in decision-making to understand a proper and effective interpretation of the battleground. It was an uphill struggle, but Jan was determined that we would take the high road. We did take the high road. Third, Jan's dedication to her family was paramount, and the family business would have taken full time for most people, but yet she always had time to interpret the importance of San Jacinto. To raise substantial sums for it, you'll see that in the written tribute, and to buy land around it to prevent industrial encroachment. It's a very significant issue, and one of the reasons we need to continue to support the Conservancy in those efforts. So I think that she was the personification of a statement from the poet Gilbrand: work is love made visible. That is Jan. Work is love made visible. And fourth, as Jan's life on earth came to a close, she said that nothing matters more than being kind to one another. Let us remember her gentle voice, her graciousness, and let us remember to be kind to one another. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes before Jim comes up to introduce the afternoon program. In the meantime, I left out two important announcements. One is at 4 p.m., following the last speaker, there will be a meet and greet in the lobby bar. It is a cash bar, but you'll have an opportunity to come up and speak to the various presenters from today. And you can let Paul Hutton know how much you disagree with his take on Davy Crockett. And secondly, we need, we would like, we don't need, but we would certainly like, and it would be very helpful to us if when you receive your online survey of the program in a few days, if you would please take the time to fill it out and return it to us. We can make events more successful if we have your feedback on what not only what went wrong, but also what went right, because we do like to get compliments. So thank you very much, and we will see you back in your seats at 1:30.
All right, I'm just like you, running just a little bit late. We're about to start. Our next guest, and I haven't told him this, so he's going to be embarrassed, could be a college president. That's because his name is Denton Florian. And if you can switch your names and be Florian Denton, just as easy as Denton Florian, Kingman Brewster, Brewster Kingman, you can be a college president. If your name is John Smith or Herman Ehrenberg, it doesn't work. But Denton Florian, the documentarian from whom you're about to see a clip before he speaks, is a graduate of both the University of Texas and Texas State University. He is an officer for the Spirit of Texas Bank. He's one of these avocational historians who has a deep love of Texas history, and he's put it to work in an award-winning documentary on one of my favorite Texans, Sam Houston. And he will tell you what it's like to bring something like this to fruition. So watch this clip, and then please welcome, when it's over, Denton Florian. Thank you.
Thank you. How many of you have seen the film? Have you? Well, that's great. It played last night in Austin on Austin PBS, and it's going to play tomorrow on Austin. Do I have a clicker up here somewhere? There it is. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the bank. The bank, Spirit of Texas Bank sponsors the film when it plays on television, and I do work for the bank. And these are people that get it. You know, it's really wonderful to be in a corporate environment where the history of our state is very important, and they sponsor a number of things, and just a great group of people to be around. Next Saturday, are many of you going to be in San Jacinto? Well, the best place to be on Friday night before that is going to be at the bank in Conroe, because we have a San Jacinto celebration, and there's going to be a Texas country artist, a free concert, and we're honoring Joshua Houston and George Washington Grant and Dr. Ashbel Smith. So if you all can come to Conroe, everybody's invited. This was an interesting project. It was a long project, but a great one. And I want to tell you a little bit about the making of the film, actually a lot. This is kind of a unique thing for me to be able to do, because I've given a lot of talks on Sam, but not too many talks on the making of the film itself. There we go. We filmed this, as it says here, in 31 locations in 5 states, and we utilized about over 300 archival images of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that we looked at. We had over 200 living history reenactors involved. We commissioned a number of paintings. We created a bunch of maps, and it's we got some awards for it. That was fun. And you know, one of the things we had to decide was, you know, how long is this going to be? I mean, how do you capture Sam Houston? I mean, and I told everybody, I said, well, the 2 dominating principles that I have, are 2 goals. One is it has to be beautiful, because think about it, if Tennessee and Texas and Virginia are your canvas and it's not beautiful and you're a photographer, you need to find something else to do, right? And the second was the history had to be spot on. So we set a very high bar on the accuracy. There's a lot of lore about Sam Houston that you kind of have to be careful of out there. So one of the blessings of it taking us so long to get the film done, we worked on this for 5 solid years. And mostly for financial reasons, but the beauty of it taking us so long to get it done is it gave us the time to drill all the way to the bottom and really deeply research some things. And so we did. There we go. I'm just going to click through here, and these are some scenes from Texas, and it looks like it's cutting off a little bit of the slides up there, but that's okay. You can see most of it. We filmed in some beautiful places in Texas. We filmed in Tennessee, and we filmed in Virginia. We filmed at Monticello. We filmed in the actual locations where the events we were trying to depict took place. So we filmed at Monticello. We filmed at Andrew Jackson's house just outside of Nashville. We filmed in the governor's mansion. We filmed the death scene in the room where Sam Houston actually died. At the baptizing scene, you know, there's a pond of water and it's very bucolic and all of that, but that's not the pond behind my house. That's actually the actual spot of water where Sam Houston was actually baptized. And I could go on about this, but we filmed in these places, and then we also filmed in the same time of year that the events took place, if that was appropriate. For example, Sam met Jim Bowie on Christmas Eve, 1832. He just got to Texas, and they had Christmas dinner together, and then they rode to San Antonio about a week later, basically along I-10, and we filmed that in the wintertime so that the grass is dead and the trees are bare, and it was historically correct. You know, the light was correct and the season was correct. This is, I'll just click through. I can't really see the slide that's coming up next, so I'll just click through and comment on the ones that I'm looking at. The cannon was in Vicksburg. The the guy in the yellow jacket, that's Brian Falcon. He was our editor. The man's simply a genius. And actually, the guy in the hammock is Brian also. He was strenuously chasing down Sam Houston in the Smoky Mountains there. But we went to, the picture at the top right is pretty fun. We filmed at the highest spot in Tennessee, which is a place called Clingman's Dome. It's in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And we got there, when we first got there, the weather was crummy, and so the pictures were kind of ugly, and you know, we timed our trip to the park so that the fall leaves were at their peak. You know, I wanted saturated color, everything we put on the screen, you know, I wanted to be the beauty shot. And we got up to Clingman's Dome, and it just wasn't happening. And so we crashed out for 2 or 3 days, and we waited for a front to pass through. And when we went back, the wind was blowing an honest 70 knots, and it was about 16 degrees before the wind chill. And this is a picture of Brian. The upslope air was, this freezing air was filling up his jacket. And it's one of those stinging colds that just feels like needles, you know what I mean? And your hands don't work because there's no blood in your fingers. And so we set the cameras up and we were filming the sunset. And then we were sitting in the truck with, you know, hot chocolate. And we were sitting there like this, and the camera was shaking. We had 50 pounds of weight on the tripod, and the camera was shaking. We had to take the shake out with software. And there were a lot of other photographers up there, and their tripods were getting blown over, and these guys are diving for the pavement to save their, you know, gazillion-dollar cameras and things. But they're beautiful pictures, but we paid for them, and I wanted you to know that, because we said, we need to go check the cameras. Like, you go check the camera. I checked it last time. You know, it's your turn to get out. That's Mike Huffine, one of our camera guys with the Hasselblad and the other. We did take some still shots. The shot in the top right, we hiked up to the top of Enchanted Rock about 5:30 one morning, and it was ink black up there. And we unpacked our gear, unpacked the cameras, and we filmed the sunrise at that point. And after that was done, we walked around and filmed the bluebonnets, and we went along the Willow City Loop and, you know, got some bucolic Texas countryside. The bottom right picture is, that's actually at Clingman's Dome again. That's back on the Tennessee side of things. This is a governor's mansion picture in the top right. We shot 3 of our interviews in the Texas governor's mansion. The shot on the left is in Huntsville. They're at the museum. And the bottom right is Lamar Alexander, of course, Senator Alexander. And what I wasn't anticipating is we interviewed Senator Cornyn and Senator Hutchison and Lamar Alexander, Senator Alexander, former governor of Tennessee, and Senator Alexander and Cornyn both have these huge portraits of Sam Houston hanging on the wall behind their desks. So these guys were genuine aficionados of this. It's not like their handlers had prepped them with some talking points for the interview guy. You know, I could have talked to either one of them all day. They really knew their stuff and were excited about it. And you can see that portrait of Sam in the background behind Senator Alexander. One of the things James Haley told me was, he said, when you get to Andrew Jackson's house, you have to get pictures of the wallpaper. Because, and there's Mike in the top left filming the wallpaper, and it depicts a Greek figure, Telemachus, in search of his father Odysseus. And when Sam Houston, it was, of course, he knew the Hermitage very, very well, and when Andrew Jackson died, Sam Houston was there. He got there about an hour too late. Jackson had already passed away, and he had been racing to get to the Hermitage. But Jackson's bedroom, to get to Jackson's bedroom, Sam Houston had to go right by this wallpaper, which is, again, a scene of Telemachus in search of his father Odysseus. And Haley said, if I had written a novel and put that in there, my editor would have laughed and said, come on, you know. But truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. We went to Sam's home site, the farm site in Tennessee, bottom left picture. It's just outside of Maryville. Not much there, a little marble marker out in the middle of a field, but we went. The tree is anybody recognize that tree? It's a Sam Houston oak tree about 9 miles outside of Gonzales. And on the first night of the runaway scrape, when, Susanna Dickinson showed up and said the Alamo had fallen and Santa Anna's on his way, Sam immediately burned Gonzalez to the ground, and they struck out in the middle of the night. And they spent their first night underneath this tree, and we had permission to go film there. Very nice people who own that property. It's private property. And I'm clicking. There we go. Whoop, did I miss one? Okay. Okay, I guess not. Yeah, go on, Charles. I just can't see what's coming here. So the next shot was just a shot of some of the reenactors. Wonderful people. These guys don't play golf, okay? This is what they do, and they're pretty religious about it. I mean, down to the authenticity of the threads in their buttons. And I learned an awful lot from them, and they're fun to hang around with. These guys are from Katy. They're from a group called the Cane Island Volunteers, and a great many of them are retired school teachers who taught Texas history in their career, which is great. They're still doing what they love. They're still doing their passion, right? We were reviewing some footage in the top right of some Native American scenes that we shot, and of course you recognize Goliad there in the bottom, and on the bottom right is the tall ship Alyssa down in Galveston. We actually went down there early one morning, and it was hot as a pistol that day, and we got there early before the tourists, and we almost didn't get out of there because it was so hot. But we got all of our shots, and then we went and had lunch. Let's see. There's Scott Griffin. I got to tell you a quick story about Scott. Scott Griffin is taught Texas history for 34 years, and then he leads this group called the Cane Island Volunteers. And when I first met Scott, I was at the Sam Houston Museum in Huntsville, and they had all their tents and everything set up, and he was down on his knees in the dirt teaching all these kids how to make a fire with flint and steel. And it was wonderful. And I looked at him for about 10 seconds, and I said, whoever that guy is, he's a school teacher. You could just tell by the way he was interacting with kids and everything. And so he was teaching my son, Daniel, how to make a fire with flint and steel, which I'm not sure was a great idea, but Daniel was pretty good at it. And when he was done, every one of these kids successfully did this, by the way. And then at the time, we were looking for somebody to put on camera as Sam Houston. And voices are pretty easy. I mean, you can find lots of voices. Voice work is not easy. I may say something about that in a minute. But, if you're going to put somebody on camera, that's a lot different. And this guy stood up. He was the right height. He wasn't overweight. His facial structure was such that I said, if I put mutton chops on this guy, I could easily, make Sam Houston out of him. And so we just hit it off, and he did an incredible job. And he and all of his fellow reenactors with the Cane Island Volunteers really helped us out a lot. There he is, very angry. I think this was a scene where he was bawling out Sidney Sherman for Sidney Sherman's fiasco. This was at George Ranch. We went down to George Ranch and filmed some scenes, and they had oxen and old cabins and all kinds of things, and it was pretty warm down there too. These are some reenactors. Actually, this shot was filmed in Montgomery County at the site of the Bear Bend cabin, which is now, Bear Bend is now located at the museum. They've moved all those cabins to Montgomery. Bear Bend is on the grounds of the Sam Houston Museum, but it's an authentic hunting cabin, we're told, that Sam Houston used, or is thought to have used. And that's the lady in the top right is inside Bear Bend. And the Santa Ana shot, that was actually done in our studio. But these are just kind of fun. This is the scene in the top left I was telling you where the death scene, that's actually in the Steamboat House where Sam Houston actually died. And the funeral parlor is the parlor where the funeral was. And that's the Woodland home in the bottom right on the grounds of the Sam Houston Museum. That's Sam's actual house, and then you recognize Goliad. So we were real happy with the look we were getting at these sites, and the reenactors were very helpful. This is the library, the governor's mansion. We interviewed Madge Roberts, the great-great-granddaughter of Sam and Margaret Houston, in this room. And one of the interesting things about this was all pre-fire, okay? But we were about to walk out, and I asked the curator there, I said, you know, is there any way we could maybe build a fire in this fireplace? Never dreaming the lady's gonna say yes. And she said, yeah, I think we could probably make that happen. And I was like, oh my gosh. I said, you know, let's get it done before somebody comes in here and says we can't. And we filmed it. And that's the fireplace where Sam Houston burned the letter from Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln offered Sam Houston 50,000 troops and a major general's commission if he would try to keep Texas in the Union. And he really had to think about that. He considered it very seriously, and he finally realized that, you know, it couldn't be done, or he couldn't do it. And so when it wasn't out of malice, but when he had made his decision, he dropped the letter in that fireplace. So again, you get to the film, and you get to this scene, and we're talking about this letter. That's not the fireplace in my house. You know, that's the actual fireplace where that letter was actually burned. This is a couple of our young actors who were explaining union rules to me, no doubt. This was an Indian fire. We had been, I relive this every time I look at it. This is obviously a Native American fire scene. We had been filming for almost 12 hours by the time this shot was taken. We were exhausted. We had been filming all day. It was really easily the hardest day of the whole project, but we came home with some great stuff, and these guys are really, really good. That was shot in Walker County, I believe. This is Tony Two Hawks Molina and some of his guys. Did a wonderful job giving us some Native American authenticity. More of the Cane Island Volunteers. You know, one of the issues on film, one of the difficulties is all of us are probably, well, we're a lot taller, but we're also easily 50 pounds heavier than anybody probably would have been back then, you know. So finding, you know, capturing the look, and if somebody is heavy, you know, we got to hide that somehow, or it goes toward the, in my mind, toward the authenticity of some of it. The artifacts in the bottom right picture came from the San Jacinto Museum, with the exception of the buckskin. The leather, the folded leather there is actually a contemporary piece. And let's see what else we got here. Here's the scene where we were filming the reenactors galloping across the fruited plain in the wintertime. That's supposed to be Sam Houston and Jim Bowie. And that was shot in Madisonville. And here is Scott in Montgomery in the N.H. Davis Museum. It's one of the last things we filmed, if I'm not mistaken. He's whittling here and considering they're voting upstairs, okay? This is when he refused to take the oath, and they called his name, Houston, 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 and there was silence, and, you know, they declared the office of governor to be vacant and replaced him, and he was, you know, downstairs whittling the whole time. And let's see. The museums, meaning the San Jacinto Museum in this case and the Sam Houston Museum, they boxed up a number of artifacts, and hats off to Alyssa and Elizabeth out in the hallway from the San Jacinto Museum, because those two ladies came to the studio and they boxed up all this stuff and brought it to us. We had access to anything we needed or wanted. It was really magnificent. Quite a privilege. And I think this ring is the single most, this is just my opinion, okay? I'm a history buff, not a historian. There's a difference. And there are people in this room that can weigh in on these types of things with great credibility. But in my view, this is the most important Sam Houston artifact that we have. It was literally on his finger for 50 years. His mother gave it to him when he was 20 years old. He wore it until he was 70. He died at 70, and Margaret slipped it off his finger and passed it around. And you can see the word honor inscribed on the inner curve. And that word encapsulates his life, in my opinion, and that artifact was on his, you know, shoes wear out, jackets wear out, pens break, and those kinds of things. But this went over the wall at Horseshoe Bend. This was on his finger at San Jacinto. This ring vibrated with the voice of Henry Clay and Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson and so on and so on and so on. It's really a remarkable thing. And for those of you who are photographers in the room, it took us about 30 minutes to set this shot up. It's a very tiny ring. It's very small. It's like a small, thin piece of wire, really. This photograph makes it deceptively large. And the depth of field on this picture is literally about 1/4 of an inch. But we set it up and got the shot. And, you know, I will say this, that's the same day there we are shooting the ring, actually, and that's Sam the Fourth in the top right. And at one point, we had, you know, they brought this stuff to us so we could control the light in the studio and shoot it the way we wanted to. And at one point, it got real quiet and kind of an awkward silence, really. And I stopped and looked up, and there are all these scholars in the room, all these guys, and I looked up, and there's Dr. Patrick Nolan, and I thought maybe we did something wrong, you know, and I looked at him and I said, "What?" And he said, "The last time all that stuff was together in the same place, Sam had it." And we just sat there and took a moment and looked at that, you know, and it was on my kitchen table, which is kind of fun to think about, but. The leopard skin vest, which of course is actually Jaguar. These are lead knuckles that they found jammed above the doorframe in the Sam Houston Schoolhouse in Maryville, Tennessee, when they renovated it in the 1950s. And it has Sam Houston's name carved in the lead. And so there's a little museum next to the schoolhouse, or there on the property, and we filmed a number of artifacts in that schoolhouse. This is some silver at the Sam Houston Museum. This is on my kitchen table in the studio that day. These are all artifacts that belong to Sam. This is some of his whittling. The little dragon is so intricate. I wish the resolution were a little higher on this photo and you could really see it, but he was quite the whittler. Let's see. This is a picture of Sam the Fourth holding Sam Jr.'s Bible. His mother, Margaret, gave him this Bible, and when he went off to war, and it took a bullet for him during the Civil War, I believe at Shiloh. I'd have to fact check that, but the bullet is just destroyed this Bible. It's all torn up until it got to the 70th Psalm. And you know, the words, I guess I have them here on the screen, but, you know, "Oh God, hasten to save me. May those who want to take my life be put to shame, and confusion come quickly to me. You know, you are my help and my deliverer." I mean, it's really something. And so they let us take that Bible, and Sam, we have footage of Sam looking at it, and it's very, very delicate. They've recently restored it, and I don't know anything about how you restore old books, but you can see that. Dagang Chen, my friend, he's a man's a genius, and he helped us a lot on the music. You know, we have a lot of different kinds of music. We have Appalachian acoustic music. We have Mozart, you know, with like a string quartet. We have Mexican guitar. We have some old hymns. It's really very rich musically. And we even took the hymns that we used and placed them in the film in places where if you know your hymns, it'll mean something. And somebody is going to go, "Wow, they did that on purpose," you know, and of course we did. This was just kind of we were camping at Bear Bend. This is the Bear Bend cabin before they moved it to the museum. And a couple of us got to spend the night, and we're probably the last ones to ever spend the night in that cabin. But we were taking some photographs that night, and it was really a lot of fun. Let's see, what else we have here. This is a group of us outside of Bear Bend. And somebody mentioned Elizabeth Crook earlier. This was Elizabeth in the governor's mansion in the foyer just inside the front door. She wrote The Raven's Bride. And we got hold of as many people as we could. At some point, we had more than we could say grace over. But the people that aren't on camera, you know, I was calling them and peppering them with questions. several times. I know I called Dr. Hardin several times, and I've called, several other people, and to really ask them about how would they have held this weapon, or would they have had a weapon like this at all? Those kinds of questions. My brother is kind of an amateur astronomer, and I even asked him one night. We had a shot of the moon when we get to the San Jacinto battle, and I said, "Hey, what was the moon? What was the phase of the moon on April 20th of 1836?" And he got back to me, and we photographed the moon in that phase. And somebody's going to look that up, and they're going to go, "Wow, they got it right." So let's see. There's Dr. Frank up there, Greg Cantrell, Mike Campbell, Dr. Patrick Nolan. The Senator, Sam the Fourth, there's Madge and Haley. We created 35 maps. And, as I said, I'm not a professional historian by any stretch, but I do like to read, and I've always appreciated early American history. And you look at some of these books, particularly the Civil War, and you see these maps, and there's just lines going everywhere. I can't make heads or tails out of those things. I can't. But with computers, we can make those maps move. You can show action, and you can really show, communicate to the viewer what was going on. So we created 35 maps. So go ahead and go to the next one, Charles, if you want to do it from there. I think I have a couple of quick examples. These are real short. We were talking about the expansion, Lamar's dream of expanding Texas to the Pacific coast. We illustrated this as the narrator was talking about it with a map like this, and then he sent, some ships down to Velasco and, down to the Yucatan, and then his Santa Fe expedition. So there are lots of little snippets like this. I think there's one more, Charles. Yeah, I remember this one. We laid in some roads, some modern roads, so that the viewer could tell where this is today. A lot of people have driven along I-10 to San Antonio and have no idea that they went right through an area where the Army actually crossed. Okay, Charles, you want to go one more for me? Just the next slide. There we go. My friend Lee Jameson painted a number of paintings for us, and this is a way we solved one of our problems. When you're doing the film, you have all the sound down on the bottom on the computer screen, and above that you have all the images. Well, you get to some point and there are a lot of black holes. And so you go, when the viewer is listening to this, what are they looking at? Or vice versa. And so we had all these black holes, and the question was, how in the world are we going to fill these holes? And so you may see 12 to 15 seconds on film, and you have no idea what it took to get those 12 seconds or those 15 seconds. You've got to scout a location. You have to hire a crew. You have to get permission to shoot on the location. There's insurance. You're going to have to feed these people, where are the bathrooms, costuming, props, and so on. It becomes this monstrous thing. And so one of the solutions was, we said we could commission some paintings for a lot less money. And then, you could get the artist to paint exactly what you want. And then when you're done, you have a painting that's obviously original and new, and it tells a story. And so several of these paintings are in the Sam Houston Museum, and then I own several of them personally. Let's see. Here's some examples of some of that artwork. I'll breeze through some of these. Again, I was talking to a camera club that I'm a member of, and we were talking about the technical aspects of this. This is really a very big part of it. When we began shooting, high definition meant 720, okay? Technology over the next 5 years was changing very, very rapidly. So we shot the interviews with this camera you see there. It's called a Vericam. It's about $120,000 with the glass on the front of it. So as I said in the shot here, you rent these things. But as we moved along, the cameras got we shot with an HVX 200, which shoots at 1080. So the resolution was quite a bit higher than the Vericam we were using. And it's also, this is like it's much less expensive of a camera. We ended up shooting with a Red, which is a very popular camera today, and it shoots 4,000. So when you go from 720 to 4,000, your file sizes get huge. And so that implies computer processing power to render these images. And when you're done rendering them, you have a storage problem. How are you going to back this up? So it was a constant exercise in managing your technology. We had one little piece in there that was pretty fun. We shot with a prosumer Best Buy special Canon T2i, $800 or thereabouts at the time, and it shot better than the $120,000 Vericam that we started with. And we actually have a little clip. And then, of course, now you have all these different cameras, so how do you blend them all together without it looking like a quilt? All these images have to look nice. So on the technical side, that was just some of that. This was the getup that we concocted. I won't even begin to explain that, but it worked pretty well. We got some Emmy Awards out of it, which was pretty fun. You don't see Brian Falcon in this shot. He was, I think, off shooting somewhere. But I brought the Emmy that was mine. It's out there in the hallway, if any of you would like to see what an Emmy looks like. And we were, it took us a long time, but the gravity of this hit us. I won't say it was debilitating or anything like that. I don't want to over-dramatize it or anything. But we took it very, very seriously because we said anything we say is going to be history, because if it's on TV, it has to be true, right? So we were very careful about what we said. And this wasn't some obscure guy that got his 15 minutes. Whether you love him or hate him, he was important to history. Texas history, U.S. history would have been very different without this individual. And it's important that we learn about him. And it was a privilege to have this as a project, to be the one to bring this story to a modern audience. And I'm very grateful to the people who lent us their time and their expertise. I learned a great deal from them. Many of them are in this room, and I'm personally very grateful for the education that I received from them. I would love to take any questions. I'm not sure how much time we have left. My stopwatch went out, but we have time. I'd love to take some questions about the film or anything about Sam. Yes, sir, in the back.
One of the most eloquent answers I've ever heard. Was your background film, and you seem to be the Texas Ken Burns.
Checks in the mail. Checks in the mail. Well, thank you. I have my degree. My undergrad is in economics. I have a master's in business. If I were doing it all over again, as much as I love and appreciate that education, I would probably do something in photography or film, because I think that's where my natural passion and inclination is. I have always been interested in early American history, mostly the Revolution, Lewis and Clark, and I was embarrassed. I'm a native Houstonian, I'm a native Texan, and I knew there was this huge story, and I also knew I didn't really know what that story was, really. I knew as much as the next guy, which isn't saying very much. So I was in Barnes & Noble, and here was this book. It happened to be James Haley's book. I didn't know James Haley from anybody, but it was well reviewed. It was recent. The Raven was written in the mid-1920s. Is that right? Right? Yeah. So people treated history back then very differently than they treat today. They took liberties that no self-respecting historian would dare take today. But there's been a lot of scholarship done in the last 90 years. So modern scholars have access to a lot of documents and things that they just didn't have access to back then. So here was this book, and I picked it up and read it, blazed through it, and I wanted to see more. I said, I want to see the documentary. So I couldn't find it. So I cut to the chase. I called the museum up in Huntsville. They'll have it. They'll know where it is. And Dr. Nolan, Patrick Nolan up there, he said, there's nothing. I said, what do you mean there's nothing? He said, there's nothing. There's several movies that we've seen today. The character Sam Houston shows up, but there's never been a scholarly treatment documentary treatment of his life. And so he paved the way, made some introductions. We got a little seed money together. And the first thing we did was the interviews. We went and talked to everybody. I said, well, let's go talk to some people. You know, who are some of the top Sam Houston scholars? Where are they? I want to talk to them. And we did that, and we came home with some of the most awesome material I've ever seen or ever heard. And so we knew we had to keep going, and we did, and that's how we got it done. So, yes, sir.
Yesterday, me and my friend were trying to follow some of Houston's runaway scrape.
Right.
And we're from the Cardo to the Roberts Farm. I looked all over for the fork in the road, and the tree,
The which way tree, right?
yeah, now, those stories,
Yes.
is there still a place to find that?
As a matter of fact, Charles, can you pull up the website? The second half of the project is the companion website to the film, which is samhoustonmovie.com. It is a gigantic repository of information. And as we traveled around, I had a GPS. And I was taking my GPS and I was popping GPS coordinates all over the place. I didn't know what I was going to do with all that data, but we ended up making some Google Maps out of it. And we posted those Google Maps on samhoustonmovie.com under the educators section. And you can click on that, and Charles is going to pull it up here in a second. And we documented all of the campsites during the runaway scrape. So you can actually see them and by GPS. Now, a lot of these are on private property, and I would beg people to respect private property rights. New Kentucky Park, it's just 9 miles outside of Tomball. It's right on 2920, I believe. Well, yeah, I've never seen the fork in the road either. I haven't even seen the tree. The tree's probably dead. I don't know. Somebody has probably researched that, but you can go to the spot where that happened. He'll get that in a second. Any other?
Then what
Yes, sir.
actual years from the start of your filming project to the finished product?
Well, great question. We shot the interviews in the fall of 2005. We finished the project. When I say finished, I mean I had a DVD in my hand 5 years later. And, we had approached PBS. We were doing this for teachers. We were doing this for education. And so we shot the whole thing really to PBS's specs with the intention of putting it on PBS. And PBS, we went into PBS and they go, oh, this is wonderful, great, and we like it. And but it really needs to be in 3 one-hour pieces. And so probably $50,000 later, in another 18 months or whatever. I mean, we had to disassemble the whole film and go in and chop it up and then put it all back together again. So last night in Austin, it showed straight through in it's 2 hours and 47 minutes or whatever it is. So it has shown in the 3 hour block, and it has also shown on consecutive Monday nights or something like that. It's shown, and that was a good thing because it made the film more, what's the word I'm looking for? Versatile. It made it easier for them to put it on the air. And so it was a long road. It first aired on PBS in March of 2013.
When Greg Cantrell did his biography of Stephen Austin, and when Jim Haley did his biography of Houston, they both told us that after the book came out, new information, new documents were coming out of the woodwork.
Yes.
Of people who had actual letters.
I'll repeat this.
And I wondered if any of that phenomenon happened with you.
Yeah, the comment was that Greg Cantrell and James Haley both said that documents surfaced after they were done, and that's absolutely true, that stuff is always surfacing. Haley told me that it took him 15 years to research his book because documents kept surfacing, and he said they had never been seen by scholars before. It impacted his book, it impacted his story, and he said, so help me, I sent the thing off to my editor, and 3 weeks later, Rice University called him and said, we just came into 300 original Houston documents, do you want them? And he said, my editor would shoot me and then shoot himself, thank you, I'm done, somebody else is gonna have to do that. And so we were filming, we were talking about this last night actually a little bit. I didn't find this, but I was present when it happened. So a guy showed up who's a direct descendant of Sam's first wife, and he had a picture of her. What he claimed was a picture of her. And, you know, there were, again, lots of scholars present who were competent to weigh in on such matters. I was just sitting there listening, you know, and he had a pretty good story. You know, she had all of her images destroyed. She wanted to disappear from history. She was buried supposedly in an unmarked grave and this kind of thing. So I called around. In fact, I think I called many of you. I mean, it's been a while. I'm not sure who, but I know I called Frank, and I know I called Mike Campbell and some others. And I said, first of all, and this is an example of kind of the depth we went to. I said, can we use this picture? And they said, the provenance isn't airtight, but it's pretty good. After I told them the story, it's good enough to fudge a little bit and say it is believed by historians that this probably is an authentic picture. And then I said, kind of an ethical question, you know, should we use this picture? Do we owe anything to Eliza? Are we under any obligation to honor her wishes to disappear and, you know, and everything? And all of them said, in very strong language, immediately, they said, absolutely not. At some point, history takes over. Anybody she would have known has been dead for 150 years. You know, you have an obligation to use this picture. So I felt very comfortable that we were on, you know, we had checked into that and we were on solid ground to do something like that. But another thing we found her grave. The same guy that gave us the picture, he said, when you get to Tennessee, he said, you know, give me a call, and he said, I'll take you out to the grave, and we'll go look at it. And I said, whoa, what do you mean? You know where she's buried? Oh, sure. I said, okay, she's supposed to be buried in an unmarked grave. Well, the people who buried her knew where she was buried, and Grandpa so-and-so was at the funeral, and Aunt May Bell put a marker, or, you know, whatever. And she's right in the middle of the Gallatin City Cemetery, and he met me there with the cemetery records, which I immediately donated to the museum. But there she is, and her children are, you know, here, and her first husband, or her husband is over there with his first wife, and her parents are in the back. And so, you know, I brought that home and showed everybody that picture on my computer, and there was about 30 seconds of dead silence. And I said, she's hiding in plain sight. Nobody has ever gone to look. You know, everybody kind of quotes each other, you know, well, so-and-so said this, and so it must be true, and, you know, but she's right out in the open. This is the homepage to samhoustonmovie.com. This is a huge website. You can spend a lot of time on this. We have a For Educators page. Can you click on that for me, Charles? I'll show you a couple things real quick. Okay, I recognize that guy. If you scroll down, we did some podcasts, and actually Jeff Dunn is in one of the podcasts. You did one of those for us, Jeff. You remember that? No, he doesn't. Well, you're on there. And these are, wait, stop. Go up a little bit. Okay, like these are the maps that we created on Google with all of those GPS coordinates. And if you click on the one, Texas Army Movements and Revolution sites, you click on that, a map will appear at some point, and it will have little push pins in it showing you the location. They're listed on the left, and you can zoom into street level on these maps. It's really amazing. And it will show you where the red push pins are. I have to move the map a little, Charles. There you go. That's the little green circles are modern road interpretive markers, little either centennial markers or granite markers or whatever. The red push pins are the sites of the Texas Army's camp. And so, you know, I'm not going to go through the website, but you guys have a look at it on your own. And there's a ton of free information for teachers there to download. And if you haven't seen the film, I hope that you will have a look at it. And it's really a privilege to be here today. And I appreciate being able to come and talk to you. Thank you very much.
We're running a little bit early, so you'll have extra time during the break to get the free popcorn that's going to be available to you outdoors, out in the lobby. We will reconvene here precisely at 2:45. And last but not least, the guys who made the Alamo movie are here. Billy Bob Thornton is in the back Wait, he's gone. What? Where did he go? You know, they'll probably have to cut that out. I can't say his name without paying somebody. But nevertheless, enjoy the popcorn, enjoy the break, visit our exhibitors, buy their books. Authors will sign them, we promise. Thank you. One more thing, if you're a speaker, see Charles Nugent immediately after the last session. He will have a souvenir for you. All right, folks, settle down. It's time to start. You are a rowdy crowd. I heard that. One of the things I learned, I shouldn't have been surprised by, but I did learn as I was doing some research for an essay on these two Alamo movies, is the triggering mechanism for the 2004 Alamo movie. It came in 2001 on September 11th. It was 9/11. And because of 9/11 and all it meant, that movie was taken off the shelf, the project, the idea was taken off the shelf at Disney and green-lighted in a big way. And within a week after 9/11, Micheal Corenblith, who's at the center of this panel, was in San Antonio. He had read Gates of the Alamo, he had grown up in Texas, and he knew what the possibilities were of a new Alamo movie. Now, the timing was not great, as it turned out, because by the time the Alamo movie came out, the surge of unity and patriotism had dissolved into more disunity about what was going on in the Middle East and what the consequences and ramifications of 9/11 might have been. But Micheal came to this project after decades and decades of work in the movies. For those of you, Micheal has just finished a film called The Highwaymen with Woody Harrelson and Kevin Costner, if I recall correctly, about the two Texas Rangers who got Bonnie and Clyde. And just having talked to Micheal a bit about that movie, I know how deeply he works on and cares about the movies he made. You're also the director? No, John Lee. I'm sorry. I didn't know. No, John Lee Hancock, the same director who finished the direction project after Ron Howard dropped out of the Alamo movie of 2004, John Lee Hancock. And I should say that many times as I was writing my essay, I referred to him as John Lee Hooker, who's a different guy altogether. I had to get the copy editors to fix that, but John Lee Hancock has directed this movie, The Highwaymen, about the Texas Rangers. But from The Grinch Who Stole Christmas to Apollo 13, Micheal is devoted to historical accuracy. It's the real Grinch. Truly is. And Micheal served both for Ron Howard and for John Lee Hancock as the production designer for the Alamo of 2004. As he once put it to me, he's responsible for everything you see on the screen that doesn't breathe. And he doesn't think that trees really breathe, because he was responsible for the trees too. Early on in that project, in 2002, I believe it was May, some of us got an invitation. There are 6 members here of the Secret Order of Opie. I can't tell you what their password is. I'm not allowed to divulge the secret handshake. But except for Andres Tijerina and Bruce Winders, the historian from Austin Community College, and the curator of the Alamo, all the members of the original Secret Order of Opie are here, including all of us on this stage, plus Micheal Corenblith, who was one of the instigators. As they picked the brains and tried to tiptoe through the arguments among 8 Texas historians and writers as we fought with each other in the Doubletree Hotel in Austin over what the real facts were of the Texas Revolution. The 2 people who survived to become actual important historical and military consultants for that film are the 2 men you see flanking Micheal Corenblith. Steve Hardin, who's most famous for Texian Iliad, the narrative of the military history of the Texas Revolution, but his multiple projects are enormous, and you will see him time and time again when Texas history comes to life on the screen, and if you're lucky, you'll hear him speak as well. And Alan Huffines, a retired military man who, when I first met Alan when we were both much younger, in 1994, when he was explaining what happened to the guys who ran out of the Alamo, as they should have if they were good military men. Once the battle's over, once the battle's lost, you need to get back to your units. You need to get back east. You need to get with Sam Houston. You need to survive and fight again. It's no crime. It's no cowardice to do that sort of thing. Alan was talking about the Alamo as history and not the Alamo as myth. And these 3 are going to tell you what it was like to do Texas history on film in one of its most important iterations in the last century. So, fellas, take it away.
Jeff, this is for you. I'd like to correct Dr. Crisp. If memory serves, and increasingly it doesn't, we held the Secret Order of Opie meeting at the Omni Hotel,
Correct.
Not the Doubletree, Jim.
I'll be 72 next month. That's my excuse.
Don't trip, don't trip, don't trip.
Yeah, we'd like to see you make 73. You know, Joni Mitchell famously observed that you don't know what you got till it's gone. But with all deference to Miss Mitchell, I can honestly say that every single person who worked on this film back in 2003 were aware at the time that we were involved in something special, and that every single one of us wanted to be there. It was a remarkable experience for everybody involved. And in the, God, can you believe it, 15 years since we did that, every time I meet one of my Mo-bros, or sisters, it's like old Army buddies getting together, and this is how this feels today. It's like a reunion. But Micheal, you were on this film a lot longer than Alan and I were. You were on it from the get-go. Could you tell us a little bit? You have a long association with Ron Howard. Could you tell us a little bit how you got involved and what you did first?
Okay, fair enough. So really what had happened is that my association with Ron Howard began with the movie Apollo 13, which is one that I am phenomenally proud of, and kind of for Ron and I really established kind of where the archival bar was going to be set. And I think that I had demonstrated to Ron sort of my ability to dive. I'm not a historian, I'm a movie designer. I'm a fan of many of the things that I work on. I inadvertently become a fan of whatever it is that I'm working on. But Ron knew that I could quickly kind of get my arms wrapped around what was going to be needed for this production. And so shortly after the picture it wasn't actually brightly green lit at that point. It was sort of what we call a flashing green light, that they certainly wanted to begin getting on with the preparation for this, and they knew there was going to be a phenomenally long lead time before they could begin filming, because Behar played largely into it, and so the finding of the location, doing the research, the construction of the sets was probably going to be at least a year enterprise before they could begin doing anything. So it was imperative to get me out of the gate very, very quickly. And because Steve Harrigan and I have been friends since college, I was a very enthusiastic reader of the gates of the Alamo, and so this history was really pretty fresh with me. And through Ron Howard and Ron's executive producer, Todd Hollowell, as soon as the picture looked like it was going to try to get on its feet, I was given a big green light to go do what you need to do. And so I felt that the first thing that I needed to do was get myself to San Antonio, and then also kind of having been another person of this generation, it's been so great for me today of seeing all these men of my age who were so moved by the same things, that the John Wayne movie had such a phenomenal impact. My father was a Texas 7th grade history teacher at D.D. Junior High here in Houston, and so I knew the story pretty well at that time, but really there's just no way to convey sort of the difference between what one can glean from a history book and the visceral, cathartic experience that one gets from watching it happen on a screen. And so I was just given a big green light and said, go do what you need to do. And I had held the Alan Abera set in Brackettville from John Wayne's picture in such remarkable regard that one of the first things I did was get myself to Brackettville, where I had the great good fortune to meet Rich Kurilla. Rich, raise your hand out there, who's a docent at Brackettville, who shared a wealth of knowledge with me and kind of got me started on the right path. Hard to understand that this was before the internet was really a tool that was capable for doing research. And so really it was gift shops and books and sort of things being handed off sort of friend to friend or colleague to colleague that really began that process. And so there were a number of things that I had gleaned from, and also there was a time before digital photography. I was still shooting film on a single lens reflex camera. And so Rich, I was there for 2 days? And just walked the set endlessly and took hundreds of photographs from all the major witness points where I knew important things were going to need to be happening. From that point, I had made the alterations that we can talk about later, but I quickly arrived at what an ideal footprint that I was going to need to be building on, which was I needed a space that was about a quarter of a mile wide and a little over half a mile long. I sketched out my ideal iteration of how Behar and the Alamo compound would work. We'd sent a prospectus out to the 13 western states and the provinces of Canada. We'd gotten back responses from more than half, but of those responses, only about a quarter of them really began to fit the bill. I went off and scouted in 4 different states, and then ultimately deciding on the Reimers Ranch location, which again is another story. Then began my construction, and then at that point, these gentlemen entered the picture.
Alan, you and I came on board about the same time. We were all at the Secret Order of Obi meeting. And for those of you who may have missed that story, all of us who were invited were sworn to secrecy because the film, which had generated a lot of buzz here in Texas, as you can imagine. And every time Ron, I call him Ron, every time Mr. Howard came to Austin, he would be deluged with reporters, and this was a working trip, and he didn't want to have to deal with that. So he wanted to fly in under the radar. So we were all sworn to secrecy, and they meant it. So we met with Ron Howard. It was a very long meeting. It was, I think he probably left more confused than ever, having attended that meeting. But what I didn't know, I guess I should have, but they were recording the meeting. And when Ron decided that he wanted to direct another project, John Lee came on board, and of course I read that in the papers. But I thought, well, if Howard's not going to do it, John Lee's probably going to want to assemble his own team. And I was teaching down at the Victoria College at the time, and I went into my office and I had an email from John Lee Hancock. He said, well, I've watched the footage, and I'd like to meet with you and Huffines. And I said, well, we'd love to meet with you. And he said, but before we do that, could we send you the screenplay, and could you be ready to talk about it? And I said, yeah, I think I'd be pleased to read the screenplay. So Alan and I read the screenplay, and then we drove up to the Reimer Ranch for the first time to meet John Lee Hancock. Alan, you want to take over from them? Tell us a little bit what that experience was like.
Yeah, and I'm sure you don't know this, but I was aware when you were running around Bracketville.
You know everything.
Rich Carilla had contacted me and said, I'm not going to tell you much, but there's big Hollywood people very interested in your book. And they're buying copies of your book that we sell, and they're wanting your contact information for later. He said, I don't know if it's going to happen or if it's not going to happen. And I said, well, statistically, it's not going to happen. And then I filed it. But I knew from that weekend. And then we had, some months later, the Secret Order of Opie happened, where you had about 8 or 9 historians, several of whom are in this room, on the most vicious catfights I've ever seen, as everyone tried to prove to everyone else that they'd make the better historian and better person on the set to be hired, and that they knew more about the Alamo than anyone else did in the room. And that was all very interesting. It was, and then we went away, and Howard quit. He stopped. He for whatever reason, he decided that he was going to move on, and he was going to be a producer and not direct it. And once again, I filed it, and I put the film into This Isn't Going to Get Made, because I've seen far more of them not get made than get made. And then got a phone call inviting Hardin and I out to the set, and we marched out to the set that night, which was, I worked in Austin at the time. Steve worked in Victoria, and went out to the set.
Just the two of us. We had the set to ourselves, remember that?
No, because Michael was there walking around.
Okay, well, that's right. You were with us. Yeah. But the sun was going down too quickly.
Oh yeah,
and we were cursing the darkness. I said, we just got here. Yeah.
It was after work, and it was, we were in shock. I mean, we were seeing the Alamo. We were seeing the town of Bear in full scale. And the first thing he and I did was, Steve and I ran to the top of the San Fernando Cathedral.
Yeah.
San Fernando Tower, rather, and looked around. But I think that one of the most important things that happened to me was at the end of the Opie meeting, I walked up to Todd Hollowell, who was one of the producers, and he was talking to Ron Howard, and they were probably trying to get the stink of historians off of him and trying to get us out of there because the meeting was over with. But I thanked them both, because I had a childhood dream that someday somebody was going to ask me how to make an Alamo movie. And that dream had always been on file back there. And if this went no further than today, somebody asked me how to make an Alamo movie. And that was, and I was satisfied at the end of that day that this was it. You know, I'll never see these people again and everything else. And then we slowly went into pre-production, and as you know, actors started coming on board and people started getting hired and cast and recast and all kinds of stuff like that.
When we met with John Lee, he said, now I want this film to be as historically accurate as possible. And let me tell you what that means. He said, first, it's got to work as a movie. It's got to be a good movie. And to do that, I'm probably going to have to combine some characters. I'm going to have to maybe constrict some time. I'm going to play. But he said, I don't want to make any historical errors in ignorance. He said, we may depart from history occasionally, but those decisions will be cinematic and creative choices. I'm okay with that, but I don't want to make any mistakes through ignorance. Which I thought at the time, that's pretty wise. And Alan and I assured him that we were comfortable with that. As has been said here today, get your history in libraries. Don't get your history from movies. But having said that, there are some notable examples. Master and Commander, Alan and I love that film, that do, depict history. Is it exact? No, but it comes darn close.
I think that's a vision. I think that's a vision thing, an emotional.
Yeah.
Almost the difference between an IQ and an EQ on how we get it. And, we're not writing a dictionary and we're not trying to do a documentary, but we are, that does, I mean, the Alamo movie, the Waynamo, for those of you who don't, that's what we call it, the Waynamo.
Waynamo, yeah.
I mean, that's still my favorite movie of all time. I can tell you what's wrong with it, standing on my head and counting bowling balls with my tongue. But it is my favorite movie of all time. It certainly influenced me to do the things I've done with my whole life. So there's some influence there. There's some things there that happen from music, from the way a picture strikes you, the way a sunset goes on film, those kind of things like that. There is an artistic side to history, and you can't point to, if you want to find something wrong with our film, you're going to find it. If you want to find something non-historical, you'll definitely find it. Some stuff I missed, some stuff Steve missed, some stuff just happened.
Some stuff we screwed up on purpose.
Yeah.
And this is also, if I can jump in, one of the things, I'll swap mics here, is that, when John Lee was giving this preference, with this preface to you about this, is that I was also new to this project. I had never worked with him before. And as Ron was exiting the picture as a director, but sort of joining the picture now as a producer, he had gone to John Lee and said, you've got to make this, you've got to make your team sort of in your image, but I would like you to at least consider two of the people that had been associated with this, which was myself and the costume designer Daniel Orlandi, who I had been working with since we were in our 20s together. And so when I began my conversations with John Lee, he was so attuned to the idea of what we had learned from our conference, from being at the San Jacinto Symposium in 2002, is that the facts are always going to be debatable. That facts are going to be slippery, they're going to change. However, truths are going to be somewhat universal. And so this is not really kind of the man who shot Liberty Valance, when the truth becomes legend, print the legend. But John was so attuned to, if we have to make some alterations factually in order to get ourselves to emotional truths, then so be it.
Well, we showed up for our meeting having read the screenplay. And I told John Lee, I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed with, the detail. I mean, it's clear somebody did their homework, and I was pleasantly surprised. He said, well, do you have any problems with the screenplay? And I said, yeah, I do. I said, none of these people sound as if they live in the 1830s. And he turned to both of us and he said, well, do you think you can help us with that? And I said, yeah, I think we could. So the first thing Alan and I did, we didn't by any means rewrite the screenplay. I mean, we wouldn't be so presumptive. But what we did do is put in some period vernacular. Alan, I'm thinking you contributed when Bowie tells Travis, you don't have the sand to talk to. That's Alan. Colonel, we have a real mare's nest out here. That was Alan. I did some things. And I thought that in terms of how the people talked, it had a ring of authenticity. Now, some of the critics criticized us for that. They said we went too far.
Too historical to be good.
Yeah, so one critic said this movie is too true to be good. So that made me, when you're a historical advisor, it's those occasions that make you just want to go take a shower with a toaster. But another little teeny bopper, I think this was for People magazine, said that she got tired of watching a movie with men with bad facial hair. If she knew how hard we worked to get that facial hair, but at any rate, it just, well, you want to talk about a little bit about that Sunday we spent in Wharton. Alan, you were living in, Alan?
I was living in Katy.
You were living in Katy. I was living in Victoria. Wharton is halfway between. So
Also, the space shuttle had gone down right about.
Yeah, that's right. I'd forgotten that. Yeah.
I was very busy with space shuttle stuff, so I had to leave the set for a couple of weeks to go do those unpleasant tasks.
Yeah.
But if you want to put it on a calendar in your mind, that's when all that was going on.
Alan, what does a military advisor do?
Well, I think that one, he does whatever he's told to do. He does whatever's asked of him. He doesn't come up with with great ideas and things like that. He takes the director's vision expressed in the script, expressed in storyboards, expressed in conversation, things like that. And a lot of that comes through knowing him and knowing what he wants. After you work with him for a while, you start knowing what he wants. And I'm the guy I'm a button guy. That hat's wrong. The drill went like this. The muskets went like that. And we didn't have any problems like that. John Lee allowed me to choreograph the entire battle scene, and couldn't have been happier. That was exactly what I was there for.
That's why I want to jump in there. I think that you're being far too biased because we relied on your knowledge of military procedure, formations, operations, that we were always sort of bugging you about these things. And certainly, well, you were there to be bugged. but certainly in every skirmish, and as the noose tightened, and then particularly for the final assault, that there was such documentation about sort of which battalion, sort of under whose command was where, sort of how the sequence came down. And this is really where Alan shone, that you were sort of handed the reins to basically stage and choreograph all of that, which was a huge job, and really kind of went to, went to the full expression of sort of your knowledge and experience in these things.
Thank you. Thank you very much. John Lee allowed me to animate it and create animation. And the reason that worked is because he was able to visualize it rather than me talking through it.
Well,
I think
the frame up behind us here is probably a pretty good example in a lot of ways, that this is kind of a conjunction of everybody's work to land in a frame like that. And hopefully 50 years from now there will be a TSHA conference and you won't be making fun of our movie. And kind of there's an old adage in the movie business, and I've done lots and lots and lots of historically based period movies. This is really my favorite thing to do. But the adage that kind of kept coming up as I was watching all the presentations, particularly from Paul and tell me your name again, young man. Frank, thank you so much. And so the idea that period movies ultimately tell you more about the period in which they were made than the period in which they depict. And so it's been really interesting sort of watching all these Crockett's through history. And God bless you for bringing Nimrod Wildfire into this, our script tried to encompass that, tried to understand and show kind of Crockett's celebrity and sort of that probable combination. But what Steve was talking about was the sideburns, which kind of brings us back to all of these pictures are essentially created to draw a contemporary audience, be it 1916, 1960, or 2004. And so those movie stars have to look a certain way in order to have an appeal to a movie-going public, that you want to see people that sort of look appealing for this particular chunk of the space-time continuum, which kind of expresses sort of all the different kinds of ways that we've seen Crockett. And so there were I wouldn't say arguments, but very, very deep discussions about how far we could go with Sam Bowie's mutton chops versus how far we could go with Houston's. And so who was going to be the more attractive character? And so Jason Patric couldn't quite go as far as Dennis Quaid could. But we're balancing, we're trying to balance sort of the history as we've known it and learned it, but also to have sort of a pleasing, cinematic, emotional, and cathartic experience for the people that are viewing it.
I tell people when you're a historical advisor, they're not obliged to take your advice. But I will say this, and they didn't take my advice all the time. I wish I had a nickel for every time K.C. Hoddenfeld, the first AD, said, "Steve, we're not making a documentary." But I will say this. We always had the discussion. And when they didn't take my advice, they had a valid cinematic or creative decision for not doing it. And I was fine with that. And I'd also hasten to say, and I tell this story, you shouldn't always listen to the historical advisor. Because I know what the DeGuello sounds like. And there's a scene in the movie where Billy Bob Thornton says, "Well, that's kind of pretty." And I always thought, John Lee, the DeGuello's a lot of things, but it's not pretty, And it was not until I saw the scene in the movie where Crockett accompanies the Mexican band
DeGuello de Crockett.
DeGuello de Crockett playing his fiddle.
Now let me add to that. That's something where historical advisors can go askew. Because
Yeah.
you and I did everything in our power to talk him out
To
of
talk to, and it's the best scene in the movie.
using DeGuayo.
Yeah, it's the best scene in the movie. And I would allow.
By that scene, that's the scene where Crockett's playing on top of the gate, and he's
Yeah.
playing the violin, and you hear the Mexican band playing. We could not imagine that music in anything other than just this really irritating sounding. And so he said, "Well, we'll fix it," and they did. And we're both the DVD commentary, and we both apologized to John Lee.
Well, you know, and
we were
and
wrong. We
it
were
was-
absolutely wrong.
Yeah, it was the music Crockett heard in his head that was pretty. And we just didn't get that. And John Lee knew what he was doing. And like I said, we both tried to talk him out of the best scene in the whole movie. So, yeah.
And so one thing that probably you were not aware of, and so in addition to what I do sort of as a designer, there's part of what I do that's called the narrative function, which is just kind of keeping you oriented in time and space. But there's also something that I'm trying to kind of do too, which I call the schematic function, which is to try to make the character's internal condition, sort of in the way that Steve, as a novelist, can sort of write what someone's thinking. This is a much more difficult order of magnitude to do in a motion picture. And this scene was pivotal, and I think that sort of the filmmakers understood it in the way that the historians didn't, was that for Crockett to provide this contrapuntal melody, that we were kind of seeing these two cultures and these two ideas sort of in a way that was not really novelistic, but really much more purely cinematic. And I could see that's why that film sort of packs the emotional wallop that it does. And matter of fact, packs so much emotional wallop that we actually recall it at the very end of the movie. The movie ends with that scene about a little harmony. And I think this is also telling a bigger story about the Mexican culture, the Texian culture, the Tejano culture, all those things sort of blending and coming together to be one thing.
Yeah. People occasionally ask me, says, well, Steve, what does a historical advisor do? I said, the most important thing a historical advisor does is stay out of people's way.
Especially KC's.
Yeah, and I'm not being facetious. Well, first thing, I think most people have a skewed idea of how movies are made. The first AD makes the movie, and the director is back in Video Village with the cinematographer. He's watching what the camera sees on a monitor. And what I tried to do is position myself well behind John Lee and watch what the camera was seeing and trying to spot anything that did not comport to history. And when I saw something, I would gently whisper in John Lee's ear, I said, John, could we visit for a minute? He said, sure. I said, I remember on the first day of filming, the very first day, oh man, you remember how cold it was? And it was a scene, a difficult scene to get, as it turned out, where Travis, brilliantly played by Patrick Wilson, is riding from the town to the fort. You'd think, well, that's a fairly simple scene, but it was a crane shot, and it started behind Patrick's shoulder and went up and over, and in the background you see the Alamo compound. And John Lee believes in multiple takes, because what he says is when you get it in post and you're cutting, you want as many options. So I don't know how many times it took us, but it was all day getting that one shot, and it was cold, But during the scene, Travis passes a Tejano couple going the other way. And I said, John, a person of Travis's background would have probably tipped his hat to those people. So, I just mentioned that to him, and he mentioned it to Patrick, and he tipped his hat, and of course that got cut, as little things like that tend to do. But, that's just the sort of thing. I think probably the most important we were doing a scene one day where a howitzer shell falls into the compound, and it doesn't go off. And Travis goes over and takes his knife out and pops the fuse out, and he says, give it back to them in the 18-pounder. I said, wait a minute, John Lee, time out. I says, this is a 26-pound howitzer shell. It is physically impossible for a 26-pound howitzer shell to go into an 18-pound cannon. It won't fit. He said, well, what do we do? I mean, the whole scene is kind of hinges on this line. And he says, could we say cut it to shot and give it back to them? And I said, well, that's at least possible. So there on the day, we change that, and Patrick says, cut it to shot and give it back. And, we're not embarrassed. But that's the sort of thing historical advisors do. There's another scene where...
Actually, if I may, can I remind you? So also at that scene, I recall that the two of you objected to the fact that that shell would be white hot.
Yeah, he would not be picking it up.
And probably would not be picking it up, and so that was a creative license that we were kind of happy to not necessarily overrule you on, but really the emotion and the drama of the moment sort of trumps. Basically, this is truth trumping facts.
Yeah. Well, the Davy death scene. If you've seen the movie, Billy Bob's there by himself. And I said, well, John Lee, historically, Crockett is with, 6 or 7 other guys. He said, yeah, I know, but it's more dramatic if it's just Crockett by himself. I said, yeah, you're right. He said, what if we have a bunch of guys tied up and dead? So what we suggest is that these guys have already been killed and Crockett's the last man standing. And I said, well, I would feel better about that. And of course, when the movie came out, I never saw any guys in robes and whatever. But, that's, it's just the sort of thing that annoying questions that historical advisors pester you with. But, there's a scene in the movie where Travis tells the 2 slave characters to dig a well. And I was there on set that day, and Patrick, in the line reading, came across as kind of an angry boss. And again, I tapped John Lee on the shoulder, and I said, John Lee, when you read the slave accounts, they say that the worst part of slavery was not the cruelty, but the condescension. I said, could you have Patrick deliver the line as if he is talking to 2 dull 7-year-olds? He said, yeah, we'll try it that way. And Patrick immediately got what I was after and delivered, and that's ultimately the take we use. But every time I see that scene, I said, well, I contributed to that. That scene is different because of me, and I get a big kick out of that.
Oh, that's a huge kick out of that. And certainly, I think that one of the things that we don't want to lose sight of is this is an incredibly, hopefully you've gotten the impression, it's an incredibly collaborative experience here. That, and this is one of the fantastic things about working for people of the caliber of Ron Howard and John Lee Hancock, is that they are secure enough in their craft and sort of in their art that they want to, basically, it's not open mic night, but certainly they have gathered good people around them, and they sort of create a very trusting environment for that input to be, to be had. And also you should have pride of ownership of those little moments. I have pride of ownership of hundreds of little moments that I know would have been different otherwise had I not either intervened or done the work. But no, you should get the assist on the goal.
Yeah.
Steve, you've got about 15 minutes left. You might want to take some
Okay, another one of those, when Alan and I were rewriting this script, the Seguin character, and one of his friends is saying, why are you backing these guys? And I forget what it was originally set to cut, but my addition was this is because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, that got in, and every time I hear that, Jordy say those words, I go, hey, that's mine. That's my line. So,
It's Muhammad's, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's mine now. It's mine now.
And could we just quickly have a raise of hands? Who got the experience of being out at the Reimer set? Could you raise your hands? Yeah. And so could you guys sort of just talk a little bit? And I made this kind of in poor taste joke that said in some ways I had inadvertently become the Make-A-Wish Foundation for Texas historians who never imagined they were going to have the opportunity to walk around in Behar and the Alamo. And so could you, and Gonzales, and also wherever the constitutional treaty was. But could you talk about sort of what that experience was like to walk onto that set for the first time?
Well, it was absolutely surreal. I mean, I've spent my entire adult life imagining what this place would be like. And now I'm walking down the streets, And when you were on the set, when you're standing in front of the Alamo, you would swear to God that that's stone. But then you thump it. And it's not stone, it's some sort of styrofoam with plaster. And kudos to the painters. You had guys going down with airbrushes, touching up the set every single day.
And we'll move on to questions quickly, but and so you can see that there's also sort of a tremendous commitment, sort of all up and down the line to this project. And the people that actually sculpt the stone are actually called plasterers or sculptors. And we were working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. And these people were so committed, the ones that had been assigned to do the Alamo Chapel facade, on their Sunday days off, they would drive to San Antonio and photograph the section of the facade that they were going to be sculpting the next week.
Cast the gate, cast the cannon.
Right.
And do stuff like that.
But these are people that are, after a 60-hour week, are driving to San Antonio on their day off to photograph and do their own research for the little bit of facade they're going to be sculpting. And so it was that commitment sort of throughout.
Well, I remember the first day we were on the set, and Alan and I were marveling at the church facade, and I very stupidly told Michael, I said, Michael, do you realize that you've got the church right stone for stone? And he said, why wouldn't we know that? You remember?
Very well.
Yeah, and I was, well, duh. Yeah. But another thing, if you are not a movie person, these guys, do it for a living, but there are many customs and traditions on a film set, and I knew none of these, and I was always sort of getting in trouble.
Certain etiquettes.
There's certain etiquettes, and I remember one time it was at the end of the day. We had wrapped for the day, and I needed to get back up to the office where my car was parked, and I saw John Lee and Dean Simler, the cinematographer, and I said, hey, could I hitch a ride with you guys? And they said, yeah. And I noticed that, during the drive, it was not a lot of conversation back and forth, and they dropped me off, and I said, well, thanks, guys. Well, the next day, Katie, John Lee's assistant, says, Steve, can I talk to you? And I said, well, sure. And she said, well, you know, the drive into the set and the drive back to town, you know, the director and the cinematographer, they use that time to talk about, you know, what they're going to shoot that day, what they're going to shoot the next day. That time is sacrosanct. So don't do that ever again. I said, well, gee, I'm sorry, I didn't know. But, yeah, you're right.
Let's have some questions.
Yeah, let's have some questions.
Yes.
So I take it this fabulous, this incredible set has deteriorated and it's not a permanent thing like the Happy Shade.
The question is on the set, the Reimer Ranch has deteriorated, and it is not like still standing like the Brackaville set is.
Well, I would note that I don't see any plexiglass walls on that depiction there. Is there any way that you guys could advise the General Land Office to try to come up with a little better depiction of the original Alamo than what has been proposed?
That's a different argument. It's beyond the scope of this.
So John Wayne sort of built, and Rich Krill, you can kind of jump in, but essentially this was built sort of where it was to be built from adobe and stone, and then a lot of Mexican labor was brought over the Rio Grande every day to do this construction. Ours was a very different sort of approach to this, and in terms of it being sort of a much more conventional movie scenery approach, and these things require constant. Steve was talking about people with the airbrushes out. They require constant maintenance, and so after the filming was completed at the end in May of 2003. I believe May, June 2003, that the set really went idle. There was some other work that went on it. There was a long negotiation with the property owner about what was going to happen to it. Ed Harris directed a film called The Appaloosa there, and the last time that I saw it was in 2008. And it was starting to look a little sad and a little melty. And then in 2011, during the Bastrop fires, it burned to the ground. It burned completely to the ground. Tony Pasca, who's out there, has some, sort of made the pilgrimage, has some photographs. But in a lot of ways, it may sound counterintuitive, but I think that a lot of us are happy that that we don't really have to think about sort of the relic that's out there now, and can really devote our attention to what the purpose of this set was in the first place, was to be up there on the screen, which it will be hopefully forever.
No, you told me your job was to build a set that lasted about 6 weeks.
Right. Yeah, just as long as, yes. And also, a funny adage about production design is what I'm most concerned with is the camera sees from the paint out. And so that was really kind of that was all I really needed to ultimately be concerned with. And so really had no intention of creating a monument or memorial. Tony.
Yeah, just to add to that, I asked you about this before, and I think everybody else might like to hear the answer you gave me. I asked you about the beautiful detail and the candle, you know what I mean, all that stuff. And I said, how did you feel about that? Because a lot of that never got on screen.
So what Tony's asking is there is inevitably, and where Stephen talks about, the men being tied up, a lot winds up on the cutting room floor, a lot winds up just not getting the actors stage differently, or the cinematographer has a different idea. And so what I was telling Tony is on the first picture that I ever did, which was about the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we could not find the actor who was playing JFK, the place that he could normally be found was on another sound stage in the darkened Oval Office set that I had built. And so this actor, in preparing to go and play whatever scene, he was prepping himself by sitting behind Kennedy's desk in the Oval Office. And this big light bulb went off that also what I'm doing is I'm creating a space not only for the cinematographer to shoot and the director to kind of have his canvas, I'm also creating basically the workspace where the actors go to work and find their characters. And so the more verisimilitude that I can add to the experience, the more that I can kind of help the actors along with their process. And whether it gets shot or not is sort of up to the movie gods, but at least I have sort of participated or contributed to the actors sort of feeling like they were there in time and space.
It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen was that set. I'm certainly sorry we can't all get in a van and go out and see it right now. It is a memory that I will hold on to till my deathbed, because just when we were walking around and you were going, okay, Alan, this is the Roman method of stacking bricks, and this is the European method, the later European method, and they're both used in the same wall. And you know, it just.
Well, and I think we need to acknowledge the contributions of Carla Curry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Carla, I mean, Michael designed the set, but she dressed the set. And I remember one day.
Just fight over that table.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is the level of detail. And Patrick Wilson requested this. He said, I think it would really help me get into the role if you could find me some books that were published in the 1830s. And the next day, darned if she didn't go to a rare bookstore. And I don't know if she bought them or rent them or whatever, but on the desk in Travis's quarters, those books are books from the 1830s. And it just, you know, sometimes helps actors to pick up on the vibe, I guess.
Absolutely, yes. Someone else. Yes.
Michael, since you built the town of San Antonio de Bejar, did that imply that the movie script anticipated any portion of the Battle of Bejar?
Oh, absolutely. When I was set off, when I was sort of plinked out into the world to see how to get this movie started, sort of what's going to be the startup plan for this picture. Basically, the only thing that I knew about the picture at the time, and this is in the early Ron Howard iteration, was that it was going to begin with the First Battle of Bejar, and it was going to end at San Jacinto. And so this was certainly baked in from the beginning, and also because I think there was, you know, this notion of telling the story from both sides. And so it was equally important for me to kind of use the San Fernando Cathedral and the Alamo as sort of opposing kings on a chessboard in complete sort of cinematic alignment. So this was baked in from the very beginning, and then a lot of tricks that I had used, which Rich Gorilla knows pretty much everyone, was then beginning to modulate what the apertures and the framing devices were going to be. But no, it had always, sort of unlike Bracketville, which I think gives short shrift to Bejar, that Bejar wanted to be expressed as fully and as lovingly and as detailed as the Alamo. This was a story about both places.
Well, I remember in the secret order of Opie meeting, Ron said, we're going to do the Siege of Bejar, we're going to do the Alamo, we're going to do Coleto Creek, we're going to do the Goliad Massacre, and we're going to do San Jacinto. I said, how are you going to fit that in 2 hours? He said, well, it's going to be closer to 3. So I went, whoa. Now, that's probably unrealistic. I think John Lee understood that. But by that time,
Pity.
you'd built Bejar.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think when you built the entire
He
town,
built Gonzales. I mean, we keep forgetting about beautiful little
right.
Gonzales.
So, yeah.
A few weeks before Ron went the other way, he told me, because I was doing a little consulting on the phone with him, that if he had to do it over, he would have done a miniseries. So that he could put the whole text.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim says that in his conversations with Ron, he told him if he had it to do over again, he'd do a miniseries. And I saw a Ridley Scott interview one time. He was talking to a bunch of young film students, and one of these young film students says, Mr. Scott, how do you see the future of the feature film? He said, the future of the feature film is on television. So, if you're doing a long form, Rome.
Look at
Rome.
the terror
Yeah, the
that's going on right now.
So we've had two hands up.
Yeah, Rich.
Rich Grilla.
A Michael question. When I visited the set the first time before you started filming, after you had the design laid out and painted and everything, I went to the Bejar set, and then I walked up to
most certainly. I mean, and we talked about, the idea, I've mentioned sort of the narrative and the schematic. And so part of what I wanted to do in the schematic of it all was that I wanted to enhance the sense of claustrophobia that these guys had by being forted up, by being walled up. And so that was completely the feeling that I was trying to get. Historically, archivally, the parade ground is about 500 feet long. The parade ground in Brackettville is about 500 feet. I took that and took it down to 340 feet just to try to get that sense of cinematic compression, but also just feeling locked up. And before Jim steps up, this young woman has had a question.
Oh, I just wondered how much it cost to build these things, to build a whole set.
Every penny that I can get under management is what it costs.
You're already applauding, and I was going to ask you to express your appreciation for not only these three, but all of the speakers today, and the people who put this together, both from the San Jacinto Battleground Conservancy and the Texas State Historical Association. Someone is going to make announcements now. It's not me. My work here is done.
And so we have winners. Actually, it turned out that we had 2 items that were up for the raffle, or for actually the donations. But the first one was a drawing for a Wade Dillon illustration. He's the exhibitor right outside with a lot of illustrations and quite an interesting set of photographs and framed pictures. And the winner of that illustration was Dawn Orsak. Yes. And so it's nice to know she made a donation to the association. The second is the drawing for the TSHA Republic map. And the big one that's been up on the screen before, and the winner for that one was Kenneth Howell. I hope he's still with us here. Yes, he is. So you have something big to take home with you. So congratulations to Ken, and thanks to all of you who contributed. At this point, our speakers will make their way out to the lobby bar, and there will be a meet and greet and cash bar. So if you didn't have your question answered, I think most people who did raise their hands had their questions answered, which means those of you who were too shy to put your hands up to ask a question now have an opportunity to go and ask our speakers. Excuse me?
We're supposed to meet Charles Nugent. Where is he?
Where is Charles? They're supposed to meet Charles. There he is. He's up by the cameras. All right, so meet with Charles right there, and then out at the lobby. Thank you very much for attending this afternoon, and safe trip home. Take care.